It's your Thursday daily delivery, and a newsy one at that. I am Michael Rand. Glad to have you guys back for another day. Velle E, Neal III joins me here in a little bit. We're going to talk Minnesota United soccer. Emanuel Reynoso situation heating up over there. Almost 2 weeks until the season starts. He is still not in camp. Velle and I will talk about that quite a bit. And we'll get to a Kirk Cousins topic that I thought was pretty interesting, and Velle and I got into it pretty good on that. It was a tough night for the Wild. They are officially slumping right now after a 4-1 loss to Dallas. First, though, what did I miss? You didn't think I'd start with anything else, and in this case, it's probably justified. Timberwolves agreeing to trade, at least at this point, D'Angelo Russell, part of a 3-team move with Utah and the Lakers. Wolves getting Mike Conley Jr., veteran point guard, along with 3 second-round picks, as well as young player Nikhil Alexander Walker. So, most important thing about this, obviously, is the end of the D'Lo era. I could not be happier about that. Nothing against the guy, nothing really against some of the skills he brings to the court. I just don't think that was ever a good fit for the Timberwolves. You know, it was almost exactly 3 years ago that they brought him in to much fanfare, pairing him with Karl-Anthony Towns. That was supposed to be the future. That relationship between the two was supposed to be a big deal. That seemed overcooked at the time. D'Lo's skill set became apparent pretty quickly, that he was a very good offensive player at times, that he was a streaky, a lot of times volume shooter, and that even when he was good this year, which was the majority of this season, after a slow start, he was heating up. He was shooting the ball very well. Even when he was a shot maker, his exact skill set was not exactly what the Wolves needed. Was not part of a Chris Finch offense, which is predicated more on ball movement, predicated more on crisp passing, quickly moving around the court, and D'Lo more of a ball stopper at times, and a spot up shooter, things like that, wanting a slower pace. Chris Finch's offense needs a lot of pace, so it felt like an awkward fit, especially when Chris Finch took over, and this moment just kind of felt inevitable for a long time. Whether you want to call it addition by subtraction, I don't know if that's quite fair, because I think D'Lo did help the Wolves quite a bit this year. You did see them score 140-some points on Wednesday night without D'Angelo Russell, without Karl-Anthony Towns, without Rudy Gobert. That should tell you something. Just one game, but that should tell you a little something. Tough night for the Wolves. Will have a hard time scoring without D'Lo crowd out there. But, really a few kind of key thoughts on this. One, it closes the book on the trade from 3 years ago. Probably the worst move of the Gerson Rosas president era, which, by the way, was oftentimes quite good. I think the Jarrett Culver draft was a misstep, part of that trade. But, the rest of what he did largely was good. A lot of the secondary players he brought in, very good. Drafted Anthony Edwards, drafted Jaden McDaniels, brought in guys like, drafted Jalen Noel in the second round, brought in guys like Naz Reid and Jordan McLaughlin as undrafted free agents. A lot of those guys, key players in the Wolves rotation now. So not trying to besmirch the basketball portion of the Rosas era, but the Russell trade kind of became the albatross on that era, because he gave up not just Andrew Wiggins, but a first-round pick that became a lottery pick to get D'Angelo Russell, and it was an overbuy. It just was. Even if a lot of us were on board with getting Russell at the time, once you became familiar with his game, it quickly became apparent, like I said, that the fit and the player just were not up to the max salary slot caliber that the Wolves were going to need. So then it became, how do you reshape this roster? And I think Tim Connolly did a good job in getting a new point guard in, getting a guy in Mike Conley Jr. who is a veteran, does not need the ball in his hands as much, will be more of a facilitator, and who, this should not be overlooked, has a lot of history with Rudy Gobert from playing with him in Utah, and might be able to unlock a little bit more of Gobert's offensive potential. Conley's a good three-point shooter, 38% for his career. He's been a solid defensive player throughout his career. You worry a little bit. He's 35. How much miles left there. He is under contract for next season as well, which is an important salary cap distinction. Chris Hine writing about this, I tweeted about this, basically preserving a big salary slot so the Wolves will have some flexibility in how they put that roster together. If they had allowed D'Lo to just expire, his contract to expire at the end of this season, they only would have been able to add players up to the salary cap, and now they can go beyond that and trade and sign players. So a lot of wins within this trade. If you like D'Angelo Russell, it is a sad day, and there are Wolves fans out there who really like D'Lo. I think he seemed like a good spokesperson for the team. Never had any bad dealings with him. As a player, he just was not the right fit for this roster. He would drive you crazy. The lasting image of him probably is sitting on the bench in Game 6 against Memphis in the playoffs last year, and that really seemed like it was the beginning of the end, right? If you can't trust a guy in the biggest moment, an elimination game in a playoff series, are you really hitching your wagon to him long term? The answer turned out to be no. Tim Conley comes in, makes his second big trade of his very short tenure. This one, I like the Gobert trade at the time. That one still, I'll give that one a little bit more time. Don't love that one. I do like this one right on its face right now. I think the Wolves got better. I think they're a better team today than they were yesterday without D'Angelo Russell, with Mike Conley Jr. We will see if that is true. But right now, the biggest thing for me is the Wolves reshaped themselves. This is Anthony Edwards' team right now, undeniably, and that is a good thing. I'm sure we'll talk about this more on Friday's show, expecting to have Dane Moore, NBA podcast, on with me to break down, the implications of this move from the basketball standpoint, from a salary cap standpoint. So plenty more on this to come. But I think Rudy Gobert is excited about this trade. Saw some video from Utah media talking to Gobert last night about how much he misses Mike Conley and how much he's interested in playing with him again. I think the Wolves will benefit from this. Again, just a hard when you see individuals traded because they're human beings, things like that. But from a basketball standpoint, the Wolves are better now, and we'll see how that goes for the rest of this season. The Wild, meanwhile, continued their slide. 2 straight losses coming out of the break. They were stumbling a little bit into the break. This one 4-1 against Dallas. Dallas, obviously, a very good team. A better quote-unquote loss in terms of opponent, at least, than the one against the Coyotes the other day, but still struggling to find any kind of offense. They rejuggled the lines, brought Ryan Hartman back up to the first line. That did not seem to work much at all. Only one goal in this game, and that was a power play goal. So still trying to figure out how they kind of achieve both offense and defense, right? That's what you're trying to do in pretty much any sport, any transition sport, at least basketball, hockey, things like that, where everybody's playing the same thing, and you got to get back. You got to go when it is time, and they just don't seem to have the jump right now to get into the play, to get those 5-on-5 opportunities that they were getting a lot last season and a lot earlier this year as well. I don't know what the answer is. I talked about it a little bit the other day, how just this lack of a true number one center continues to be the biggest storyline, and they've kind of papered around it with overachievement and the sheer brilliance of Kirill Kaprizov, but that is really what's holding them back right now, is still not having that dominant number one center that makes everybody's life easier. So we will see where that goes from here, but they have a tough homestand coming up, and they just lost a bunch of games. They're falling in the playoff race. Still a good chance to make it, but right now looking a lot more tenuous than it did even just a couple of weeks ago.
Take a playcation to Mystic Lake. With 24/7 gaming, the good times never have to end. And you can satisfy your cravings at our restaurants and bars. Or relax in one of our luxurious hotel rooms. Those that play together, stay together. And don't forget to join Club M so you can spark new memories and bask in the rewards along the way. Follow the lights to Mystic Lake, where every day is playday.
All right, let's bring in Velle E. Neal III right now, Star Tribune columnist. Want to hit a lot of topics with you today, Velle, but first, how are you doing?
I can't complain. It's getting warmer outside. The days are getting longer, so it makes one feel optimistic about things in the world right now.
Yeah, I mean, we take whatever we can get, and when it's 40 degrees in February, early February, as it were, we are happy about that for sure. And I'm guessing you'll get some extended sun at some point if you're going to head down to Florida, probably at some point with the Twins. Maybe I'll get to that a little bit later. Maybe we can talk a little Twins, but I want to engage you on some soccer talk right away because you and I are probably two of the bigger soccer people on the Star Tribune staff. And I'm just watching more or less from afar the Emanuel Reynoso story situation with the Loons, where it's been over a month now since they started training, and we still have no clarity on when or if he is going to be able to show up with this team. There's a two-time All-Star, clearly their most important player. When he's healthy, when he's there, they are a much better team. The team not able to provide much by way of updates. The Loons, certainly a professional team. We cover them like a professional team, but they're not on the same probably stratosphere yet as the Vikings or the Twins or the Timberwolves or Wild. If this was one of those four teams, this story would be going bonkers. And I feel like maybe we should be paying more attention to it. What do you think of it?
Yeah, I agree with you. This is something that is troubling to me. And the one thing that's in the back of my mind is that does Reynoso want to remain in Minnesota?
Yeah.
Is this his way of saying, I want out, I want to be transferred, I don't want to play here anymore, I want to move on, I want to move upward? Does he want to leave MLS and move to another league? He's got this court case situation hovering over his head. I don't know if that's playing a role in this or not. But there's more questions than answers right now. But if I'm the Loons, I'm going to tell his agent, I said, look, he needs to be here. Our season starts in a couple of weeks.
Yeah. February 25th. That's like 16 days, 17 days.
That's my thing. Once you allow this type of behavior to happen, then, and this is a guy who's 26, 27 years old. And let's just say he's deliberately avoiding the team because he's hoping to get transferred. Well, this needs to get sorted. And Minnesota United needs to move him and find another playmaker, because we've seen what the Loons look like when he's not in the lineup, and it's bad because there's no playmaker. There's no person that makes the defense go, oh crap.
Right.
Reynoso's got the ball. He's about to do something fantastic and help them score. They don't have that guy who strikes fear in defenses like Reynoso, and they need to move on and find someone else. If he's not happy, say you're not happy, and we're just asking, what do you want right now, Ray? Ray, what do you want? What's going to make you happy? No, wait until the day before the regular season. It's something you can't do and just show up and want to play.
That's the thing. I don't think they know what he wants. Based on how vague they're having to be right now, I don't get the impression that they even know what exactly is going on here. And I think, probably complicates things that he's in Argentina right now. He's probably harder to reach when he's there. It's harder to, if he was a short flight away and you could go visit him and you could kind of get to the bottom of this, maybe that would be one thing. But I think maybe the distance and the communication there is a little bit of a sticking point too. But you're right. The fact that this has gone unresolved, the fact that Adrian Heath seemed more optimistic a week ago than he does right now about a timetable is very troubling to me.
Yeah, I agree. And he does have an agent. The agent should be communicating with the Loons as much as possible on this matter. Like I said, I don't know what the conversations are. I don't know if they're talking about his court case. I don't know if they're talking about his happiness. I don't know if they're talking about his health. I don't know, what's at issue here. But what is at issue is that the season's about to start, and the rest of the team has been working out for like a month, and he hasn't been with the team. So all of a sudden he's going to drop it to the middle of the lineup, and everything's going to be hunky dory. I don't find that. I don't find that feasible. And my thing is that once you let this type of behavior sink in, if he is being a diva and taking his sweet time to get into the club, then that's something that's going to cause problems down the road here.
Yeah, you're right. You can't allow this to go on if that's what's happening. It's going to be right. It's gone on long enough that it's hard to imagine how the resolution would be if he comes back, right? Like if he says, okay, I'll be there next week, and he shows up, how is that going to sit with teammates? How is it going to sit with the Loons? I mean, ultimately you get over these things, I'm sure, as long as he's great on the field and can catch up to speed, but you're missing a lot of valuable time right now. You're missing time to work with your teammates. I mean, they're heading to Palm Springs pretty soon for another part of this like extended camp. Like this is the time where you're working on all the things. You're working on your fitness, you're working on your connection. Like this is the valuable time right now that they're missing out on.
You should not have problems with your best player. You should not. The best player needs to be engaged. The best player needs to be present. The best player should be available, and the best player should be around his teammates. And none of that's happening, and it hurts the Loons in the short term and in the long run. And like I said, if he needs to go somewhere, then I almost said Wolves. Then the Loons need to push forward to transfer him somewhere where he's going to be happy, and then take whatever money or allocation dough they can get with his absence, and try to find another playmaker. Because to me, this is not this is an untenable situation when a guy is going radio silent on you when he needs to be with the team.
Yeah, and the hard part for the Loons right now, and we'll move on in a minute. The hard part for the Loons, I'm sure, is they've run so much of their stuff through him. Like, he is so important to their success that it's hard to imagine them just so easily moving off of him and finding an equivalent player or close to equivalent player. So I'm sure they're exploring every possible avenue to get him here and make sure he's happy, but you can only acquiesce so much in making a player happy.
And plus, I think Adrian Heath worked hard during the offseason to try to build a better defense. And now that new rebuilt defense is going to be under attack now, because a guy like Reynoso is not going to be around or in form at the beginning of the season. And that's going to lead to possession issues in the attacking third, which means your defense is going to be put under pressure a little bit more than it should, because you're not possessing the ball and playing through Ray the way you normally do.
You're right. And they just signed a new defensive player on Wednesday, Miguel Tapias. Looks like he could be pretty good for them. So you're right. They could be stronger in certain areas, but if they don't have their playmaker in the middle of it all, it will be a struggle to score goals. So we'll see how that all plays out. It's still a little bit of time. It's just the fact that we just don't know much is the part that a month in is hard to reconcile.
I know, and so many other things going on in the league, and teams getting better and making moves, and it's time. I know only a small segment of the population is going to get fired up about this, but people are excited for the MLS season to approach here. Last year finished out great, and the season ended with a thrilling championship game. Philadelphia and LA. So I think people want to see if the league can kind of continue to take over from last year. And Reynoso's part of that trend. He's part of one of the more talented players in the league.
Yeah, and
he's one of the faces of this league. If he doesn't believe it, he should be. And he's not around. So
no.
I can't wait to see how this ends.
What gets resolved first, Lavelle, as we transition subjects? Reynoso, or do we find out about Aaron Rodgers first? Because he's going into the darkness pretty soon here for his for a darkness retreat, and he's going to decide about his future maybe a little bit after the Super Bowl, it sounds like. I'm not buying this darkness thing at one bit. We can only take so much Aaron Rodgers. I think he does this knowing that he can get away with it. He can go on the Pat McAfee show and say whatever he wants and not get called out for it. Okay. He gets in front of the media and says, yes, I've been inoculated, when he had not been vaccinated. He had his own special procedure I've been immunized. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I've been immunized. That's right. To be COVID compliant, even though he didn't take the jab. He says other crazy stuff, and now we're led to believe that he's going to go into darkness for 4 days. He's going to sit in a dark room, and just ponder his future and his life. Not buying it, because he has a platform where he can say whatever he wants and get away with it. And I'm not happy about this. So no, I don't think he's going into a 4-day shell here. He's going to be, worst case scenario, he's going to be at some palatial house, probably getting some sun by the pool, taking a couple swims and thinking about his career that way. Because once again, he has a different idea with the word immunized is.
Yeah.
He probably has a different idea what the word darkness is. His idea of darkness could be out in the sunshine just by himself.
Maybe he does. I buy the darkness stuff because I think he is of that kind of that mindset where he kind of seeks out these sorts of experiences. But I do. Here's what I think. I think I wrote about this a little bit this week. I think in telling us about this and just his general behavior with this and other things, I think he's giving us some clues, right? He likes attention so much that I cannot possibly imagine him retiring in the same year that Tom Brady is going to retire and then having to go into the Hall of Fame, kind of riding Brady's coattails. So I think what we know about him from this and other things is that, if there's three options on the table, retirement, play with the Packers, or get traded, I don't think retirement is a viable option, even if he says it is.
Yeah, I expect him to play somewhere next year. I think he'd like to see what he could do with better players around him, so I keep thinking he's going to follow Brett Favre's footsteps, end up in the Jets somehow, and go to that team that's got some talented players around them. But I can't see him retiring. And I think Tom Brady would be upset that if Aaron Rodgers retired too, because he'd be like, wait a minute, now we're going to share the same podium at the Hall of Fame.
Right.
I'm not happy about this. I mean, Tom Brady's already moved on to being like unofficial underwear spokesmodel.
Right.
So he's trying to get going in that second part of his career here, and he knows when Aaron Rodgers is entering his realm.
No, and I don't think Rodgers is ready for that either. I think even though his numbers were down this past season, he was an MVP in 20 and 21. I think he's still got good years left in him. I think you're right, though. I think he does want to win somewhere. Part of the retirement thing is he'd walk away from a lot of money right now because of where he's at still in his career. And I do feel like he might be in that mode where he is ready for a fresh start. I don't know if a trade is the most likely scenario, but I think it's far more likely than it was last offseason, even though they were talking about it a lot more last offseason.
Yeah. But they decided to run it back and do another last dance thing. And ended up not being the type of season they wanted. And you could argue, part of it's his fault, part of it was the defense. It took him a while to find balance with running the ball and passing the ball. I think the last half of the season they achieved that type of balance. And they tried to make a little run there at the end, but they lost at home to the Lions. So in what ways can that roster around him improve for next year? So I think if he does come back, it's going to be with a different team, man. It could be the Jets. It could be maybe reunited with Devontae with the Raiders.
Yeah,
maybe.
That's possible.
I don't know where else he could go. Then there's two spots. I know there's teams that to look for quarterback help, but there's no bigger stage than New York, and he would automatically put Daniel Brown in his shadow as soon as he arrived in the Big Apple. So I kind of like the idea of Aaron Rodgers going east to the Jets.
You mean Daniel Jones? Just to clarify.
What did I say, David?
You said Daniel Brown. I don't know who that is.
Jones. I'm sorry, Daniel Jones.
That's okay.
Yes.
Okay. One more thing for you, Lavelle. It's an interesting tweet that I saw the other day, and it's not a novel idea, but it just wasn't something I was thinking about in the context of the Super Bowl coming up on Sunday. Anand Anduri said, something that should be discussed more. The Chiefs had a perfectly fine quarterback in Alex Smith and traded up for Patrick Mahomes anyway. The Eagles had a perfectly fine quarterback in Carson Wentz and drafted Jalen Hurts anyway. Good enough isn't good enough. What do you think of that in the context of these teams and maybe the local team as well as they're pondering their quarterback future?
Well, I don't totally buy into that tweet because Carson Wentz was having problems with the coaching staff in Philadelphia. And I think they wanted to move on from him because he was tough to deal with. And Alex Smith, it wasn't like Alex Smith has ever been an elite quarterback. He's been a solid quarterback. Maybe a couple times he's been close to Pro Bowl level, but it wasn't like, they're getting rid of a high-powered, top 5 quarterback in Alex Smith. So, and I knew that year of the draft, because I knew someone who knew Mahomes' family, that the Chiefs were all over Patrick Mahomes from the minute the college season ended, and they were infatuated with the guy, and they wanted to bring him in and put him in a situation where he sat for a year. So, is there value of upgrading a quarterback? And are you trying to weave Kirk Cousins into this, that the Vikings could improve from Kirk Cousins?
I absolutely am, because think about it. Like Alex Smith was 50 and 26 as a starter with Kansas City. They went to the playoffs a whole bunch, but he wasn't the kind of guy that was going to elevate you beyond just getting to the playoffs. And I think Carson Wentz, maybe that's a little bit of a different story, but he was in the 3 years before Jalen Hurts was drafted. Carson Wentz was very good. He would have been the MVP probably in 2017 if he hadn't gotten hurt late in that season. He was pretty good again in 2018, and he was pretty good again playing all 16 games, 4,000 yards, 27 touchdowns, 7 interceptions, good QBR, went to the playoffs in 2019, and yet they draft Jalen Hurts second round in 2020. So I'm just saying neither of those guys probably was your franchise quarterback necessarily at the time. You'd seen enough from both of those guys, one older, one younger, to know that maybe that wasn't who you wanted forever, but both of those guys were perfectly acceptable and could have gotten you back to the playoffs. And that's where I think the Cousins parallel is. Not that you need to move on from Cousins right now, but is there kind of this dual track where you say, yeah, Cousins is good enough to get you to the playoffs, but if you're going to get to the next level, you got to start thinking about that succession plan now and not later.
Well, I still sense that there's let's kick Kirk to the curb tone in your voice here, which matches a lot of people in town. It seems Kirk can't do anything right. And yes, he's brought some of this stuff on himself, especially with his vaccination stance last year. But I'm going to say this. I think he's borderline top 10 quarterback in the NFL. I think he's coming off a really good season, and he's played on a team that's had a horse bleep defense in each of the last 2 years. And
that's 3 years. But yes, I get you.
That is taken. It has to be taken into consideration when you evaluate the Minnesota Vikings. Should he have checked down on that last play against the Giants? No, but play design. Why we running someone a route for 6 yards instead of we need to get 12 or whatever it was, So I think a lot of people need to take the blame for that one. And if he had decided to wait a second, was he really going to get killed, or did he have time to hit someone across the middle? I don't know, but I think. Just watching the Vikings many times this year, this guy's made some brilliant throws. I thought, it was a matter of him having time to throw, but he actually was one of the more pressured quarterbacks in the league this past year. So the fact that he was able to put up the numbers he did, I think does speak to, how talented he is. But he's no spring chicken. And yes, you got to think about the future. And I agree with you from that standpoint, is that you got to come up with a way to break loose from Kirk. And now it's going to get tougher here, because I totally expect the Vikings to renegotiate his contract and extend him for another year or two to take some financial pressure away from this year, because the Vikings are over $20 million over the cap.
Yes.
More than $20 million over the cap, and that needs to be addressed. And it's going to lead to some tough decisions and some players, not just other than Kirk, probably leaving, after in the next few months here. But I think if you're an NFL franchise, you're always keeping an eye out open for young quarterback and talent, and to see if they could be molded into someone who could be a good player for you. Who knew that Brock Purdy was going to be having the run he had? Right. But the 49ers had no problems taking Purdy when they already had Trey Lance on the roster.
Right.
So that tells you it's probably shrewd to keep an eye open for a signal caller every year, even if you have an established guy. Your third string should be a developmental guy, your practice squad guy, whatever. So I buy that notion. Now, should the Vikings move up in the draft to get a top quarterback prospect?
How are you going to do that? I mean, they got very little draft capital, right? They got so little draft capital right now and so much need. That's part of the problem.
Right. It's going to be tough for them. So, and they got needs elsewhere. They probably still need some O-line help. They definitely need help on defense. They've got to upgrade there. I can't wait to see what Brian Flores does as defensive coordinator.
Yes, I agree with that.
He's going to go to 4-3 or 3-4. Someone told me that Neil Hunter lost 20 pounds last year because he was going to move to a 3-4. And I wonder if that took away from his effectiveness as well. Maybe. Now, in the 3-4 front, you can still line up 4 and have an outside edge rusher with his hand in the ground. But there were times that Daniil had to drop back in coverage, and I guess he lost weight in order to be prepared for that. So I wonder if you go to the 4-3 and tell Daniil, muscle up a little bit more, big boy, and get back to being the force that you were, that we'll see a better version of Daniil next year. And to me, that goes into Flores' decision-making process as to what defense he wants to run.
Yeah, I agree with all that. And I think fixing the defense is priority number one. It just gets harder to fix the defense when you're devoting so much money to the quarterback who, like you said, is a borderline top 10 guy. When you're devoting so much money to a guy like Kirk Cousins, who is, like you said, an above average quarterback, but one who makes a lot of money and doesn't make a lot of plays off script like a guy like Jalen Hurts can make, like a guy like Patrick Mahomes can make. A lot of things have to go right for you to go on a run. It's much easier to do that when you have a model like the Chiefs, who had Patrick Mahomes on a rookie deal for a long time and he was great and now he's getting paid, but he's elite. He's an MVP. Or Jalen Hurts, who is very good already and on that, he's making $1 million or so this year. Like that's just kind of plain. You can do so much when you have that. So I would just like the Vikings to be able to get into that position at some point. Not saying necessarily this year or even next year, but they got to start thinking about how they develop that next player. And I know they tried to do it with Kellen Mond, and that didn't really work out. That doesn't mean you stop doing it, and the staff shouldn't look at that this year.
Yeah, and the other thing too is that they want to approach Justin Jefferson about a contract extension. Yeah. And the first number of his annual salary is probably going to be a 3.
Yes.
and that's going to, when you have two guys, that's Kirk and JJ making $60 million, that means two guys will be making about a quarter of the of the Vikings payroll, right? Because it's supposed to be, about 18%, about 20%. I think the payroll was at 260 or something like that.
Yeah, I think the cap is like 225 next year.
Okay, if it's 225 next year, then 60 million, 225. Oh, well, that's more
like
than a quarter.
Yeah, it's a little over a quarter. Yeah, it's a lot.
I wonder how you put together a team that way. You have to hit bullseye on a lot of draft picks for that to happen.
Right.
That means you got to have a third rounder and a fifth rounder click. You know, so scouting and development still comes into play here because it allows you to pay good players a lot of money while you're using guys as rookie contracts to fill out your roster. So
well, and one final point on that too is that Jefferson probably will have a say in this in terms of the quarterback, and the guy with whom he set a lot of these records, Kirk Cousins, has been his quarterback the whole way. He might not want some sort of unknown commodity or unknown guy in there while he's in the prime of his career. So that's all part of the equation right now. I'm just saying, like, both of those teams, it's just interesting to think about the Super Bowl teams and the path they took to get to where they are right now and how they weren't content to be good at quarterback. They wanted to be great.
Yeah, you're right. You're right. And, roster construction, it's going to be different for each team, and so the Vikings are trying to do it with a guy who's not, a guy who makes plays with his feet, and he's trying to prop up a defense that's not that great, but he does have the best wide receiver in football.
Yeah, he does
as a teammate, and he may have a new running back next year.
Yes, he will.
So that's going to be an issue too. So, and you may have a different number 2 receiver next year. So that Cousins Jefferson connection needs to be strengthened and fortified because that's going to be the best route for the Vikings to be in a good offense next year.
Well, we'll see how it all plays out. We'll see how the Super Bowl goes. I think it'd be a great game. Looks like two pretty evenly matched teams. I hope both quarterbacks are healthy enough to be the best versions of themselves in that game, because that could make for a pretty epic game. I think I like Philadelphia. I think they're a better overall team, but I wouldn't bet against Patrick Mahomes.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think Philadelphia has an opportunity to run the ball on Chiefs effectively. I used to work at Kansas City, so I got a lot of friends down there, and they are stoked for this one, but they would take a narrow victory instead of a glorious victory. There's a lot of people are going to vote for Kansas City because they don't like Philadelphia or Philadelphia fans, so they may have the sentiment of the football world on their side. But the level heads and the people who are probably gambling on the Super Bowl are probably take Philadelphia to cover. It was just 1.5 yesterday. I don't know if the spread has changed, but I think your head is Philadelphia and your heart's with Kansas City.
I agree. Well, we'll see where it winds up. Lavelle, appreciate your time as always. We'll catch up again soon, all right?
Anytime, my friend.
Good stuff from Lavelle, and the thing we probably didn't mention enough in our analysis of what the Vikings should do about the quarterback position long-term is that, A, this is not supposed to be a great quarterback draft this year, and B, the Vikings just don't have a lot of draft capital, and in order to get more, they would have to trade down a little bit, and if you trade down, you're taking yourself out of the conversation for some of the more elite talent. So I don't know how they solve this equation right now. I just thought it was interesting to think about Jalen Hurts, to think about Patrick Mahomes, to think about the teams that drafted them and where they were when they took them, and how they were in situations that they could have said, hey, we're just fine, and instead they went for it to different varying degrees and wound up with quarterbacks who are now starring for them heading into the Super Bowl. Quickly, the cooler Aaron Rodgers heading into the darkness. He's going on this darkness retreat right after the Super Bowl. Could not help but think, though, how a guy who desperately wants to seem interesting, who desperately wants attention, is telling us that he's heading into the darkness by shining a big light on himself. It's just very classic Aaron Rodgers, and if it tells me anything, it's this. He wants the attention so much, there's not a chance in the world that retirement, even though he says it's an option, there's not a chance in the world to me that is going to be the outcome of his decision once he comes out of this darkness retreat, this meditation, which I think, by the way, not to disparage it, I think it's pretty cool. I would love to do something like that. I think something like that would give you some of the clarity you need. My issue is that you don't need to go tell everybody about it, because kind of the purpose of it is to gain that clarity, is to kind of be by yourself, to sit in that moment. You don't need to tell everybody beforehand unless you are trying very hard to be interesting. Long story short, I think there's no chance he retires, and I still do think now that a trade, instead of staying with the Packers, feels like a more likely option now than it ever has, and we will see how that plays out once he returns again to the light. That'll do it for me today. Dane Moore coming up on tomorrow's show, like I said, to talk more Wolves. Until then, enjoy the rest of your Thursday. I'm Michael Rand, back at it again tomorrow.